Hi everyone, it's the tiniest of Logans, finally back with a 32 core 2990 WX and 2950X review, including power results, but overclocking. Okie pokey. So thank you for tuning in to the Threadripper 2 review. Heavy metal, all of that stuff. Just realised something. Be wrong to make the video without a t-shirt on. So it's very, very last minute because there's been an awful lot of testing that's had to be done because I've retested the 1950X. So we have some up-to-date, absolutely bang-on current results to compare the 2950X to. Not X2, but you get what I mean. It's getting late. I need to crack on. So you're going to be aware, but I've done an unboxing of the immense packaging that I got with it. But you guys do get it in this funky little box. And then you can undo the box, as you've seen with everybody else online that's got one. You've got the little box in the bottom where your sticker is, where the screwdriver is. Well, it's actually a torque screwdriver so that you can't over tighten the socket, and pretty much you get an AIO mount for the Asetek ones, but the Asetek ones aren't quite big enough to cover the entire socket. Now while we're talking about this, we'll expand. No, we won't. We will go on. So the Asetek ones, they don't cover the entire socket. AMD say it does actually cover what's underneath where the cores are, but the actual IHS on the top, it doesn't. So I've actually used a full cover TR4 360mm cooler from Cooler Master. So the AIO results and all of the overclocking results were done with this 360mm cooler. I did change the fans on it though for some Corsair ML 2400s, and that was, sorry, 24,100 RPMs. And that was literally just to make sure that we didn't ever hit any thermal issues, and thankfully we didn't. And to be honest with you, this cooler has actually done amazing. And it has had significantly lower temps to any of the Asetek based 360mm AIOs, or any of the Asetek AIOs really. So although they say it does cool it enough, you can get significantly better performance with that bigger heat plate, which is something that we found out in the early days anyway, because with the original Threadripper, I was using a Noctua cooler and getting better results than a 240mm AIO, and it was one of the few times that you could ever say that out loud. So it counts for this one. And with the 32 core, when it comes to manually overclocking, as you'll see in a bit, you do need to make sure that you've got some decent cooling on board. And that's just because of the way that they work with this. But I'm going to try and cover as much as I possibly can about the cooling, the overclocking, explaining why the overclocking makes such a big difference with temperatures and power, because when you overclock them manually and force everything to run, they do consume quite a bit of power. So I've obviously got the 16 core native for review today, which is replacing the 1950X. That's going to give you a maximum boost of 4.4 gigahertz with a base of 3.5. One thing I will say though is when you load all of the cores up, we were getting 3.7, sometimes even 3.8 across all the cores. But they can kind of fluctuate a bit anyway, and they do move around. It's not like they stay at an absolute bargain basement, and that didn't matter what benchmark I was running either. Didn't matter whether it was even like Blender or anything like that. They always moved a little bit. With the full fat 2990 WX, it was, they say, 4.2 for a max turbo, 3 for a base. We were getting somewhere between 3.6 and 3.7 as an evil core run when you load the whole CPU up. Now, one thing I do need to say is this is all because of the stuff they've essentially brought in. Remember when Ryzen 2 first came out, or Ryzen Plus as they liked us to call it, because all of these CPUs are now 12 nanometer, and they've brought in all of the XFR and the extra boost stages from the old Ryzens into this. And that makes it makes a pretty big difference, because essentially, especially with the Precision Boost 2, that's the word I was trying to remember and I was having a bit of a mind block, it does mean that the CPU boosts itself even further. Now, it will boost itself even further based on, and this is where it gets complicated, the amount of power that your motherboard is able to deliver it, for one. But more often than not, it's going to be based on thermals. So whenever we were doing that, I mean, we did all of our tests with the AIO to make sure that we were giving you the best possible results. But we did do separate air cooling tests, not performance tests, just for, you know, to see how hot the CPU's got. But that's just something for you to keep in mind, that throughout all of the tests in all of the graphs, they were all done with that AIO. The only things that we did do was add like move fans around and stuff for the overclock, because we'll talk about like VRMs and stuff like that in a minute, or on this one specifically, because I have tested this on the Zenith Extreme. Now, you may be wondering why I've not used another board, but essentially I retested the 1950X on the Zenith. Then when the press pack come, and there was another Zenith in it, which essentially had this extra cooling plate added, and you can put another fan across the VRM at the top. It just made sense for me to be able to correlate the graphs. Now, I will have other separate motherboard reviews for you to be able to go and have a look at. This is just our CPU review today, and I'll talk to you a bit about some of the stuff that happened with the board and the other bits and bobs that we can talk about. But, you know, I have got so much information to get over to you. So it's one of those ones where get yourself comfy, get a cup of tea, sit down, chew the fat with me. This is just like we would be having a pint in the pub. And to be honest with you, at this present moment in time, I could really do with a pint in the pub. Anyway, so something that had come up was people that were saying about the differences between the 2950X and the 2990WX with the way that the CCXs can access the memory. So with the 2950X, you can see that you've got two CCXs. Each of those have got 8 cores in, and you can see that they've got direct access out into the DDR, the memory. So there's 2 channels each side because it's a quad channel board. But when you bring the slide up, which shows you the 2990WX, it becomes a little bit more apparent that if you have a look, the 2 CCXs in either corner do not have direct access out into the DDR. So what they have to do is they have to jump via the Infinity Fabric from one CCX over the other CCX to then get access out into the into the memory. So the difference between the two is the 2950X, you can essentially have it in either an UMA or a NUMA memory config. So it's basically either a non-uniform memory access or a uniform memory access. Whereas the 2990WX is only non-uniform memory access. So that's the one that's had to do the little skip. Now with the 2950X, what you can do is switch them across. So you can basically turn it off. But the reason why they've done it, and there's some of them, and it will switch them natively for you, by the way, with the 2950X, depending on whether you're in creator mode or the gaming mode. But the reason, and this is the thing that I want to clear up, because there's a lot of people saying, oh, the latencies on the 2990WX is going to be terrible because it's got to go across that little bit of Infinity Fabric. And you know what I mean? There is a little bit of latency there, but it was something that was specifically covered when, and many questions asked when I was lucky enough to go and see these demoed by AMD. Now, the reason, so most programs won't ever really notice any difference at all with the way that works. It's just going to work, you're not really going to notice it. If you've got some very specific benchmarks or server grade workloads, and it is only server grade workloads, sometimes then there may be a slight performance decrease, but it's nominal. So for the bulk of this, with a 2990WX, you're not going to have any issues whatsoever. But the reason why they've done it, and this is the critical reason why they've done it, this was the only way that they could make it work on the current TR4 platform. If they'd opened it all out, it would have meant a new socket. It would have meant a complete redesign. So that's the reason why they stuck with it. So let's face it, for that little memory access thing, for them to have been able to have made it right for those people that have picked up on it, it would have meant them abandoning the TR4 platform and then moving on to something completely new. And that's something that the competitors normally do quite a bit for not a lot of, you know, reasoning behind it. So they've done it this way. So those of you out there that are going, the little hop cache, do you know what I mean? Sorry, the little hop, the latency. Those of you, if you are that hell-bent on it, that is where Epic comes in, because Epic is built that way. That's why there's a totally different socket for Epic. So there's, you know, you've got those reasoning, those bits that you can now kind of calm down about. Most benchmarks, or pretty much all benchmarks and workloads that you're going to use it for, especially on a board like this, you're never ever going to notice. And if you do notice, you're going to have, like I said, some pretty damn good benchmarks to be able to pick up the tiny little bits of differences. But anyway, so that is the kind of mates in a pub approach to it. So hopefully now you can kind of understand. And like I said, with the 2950X, you can actually choose between UMA and NUMA as well. And I'm just having a look. I'm pretty sure it's UMA. The 2950X is UMA out the box. And if you want to turn it into NUMA mode, that is when that's slightly going to favour the gaming, and it's going to be ever so slightly faster cache as well. So that's where the gaming loads come. That's another reason why they're not particularly fussed about the fact that the 2990WX is kind of wide, because they haven't specifically favoured gaming in any way for a 32 core processor. And obviously we know the prices now, they're going to be 900 for the 16, and you're going to be looking at around 1800 for the 32. So let's face it, you know, we're already kind of seeing they're leaning towards the hardcore workstation side of things, but not quite getting there with like full-blown server load. So it's a decent mix. But, so we had that, and now I know you're all going to be asking me about overclocking, you're going to be asking me about temperatures, you're going to be asking me about power, and I've done this in like droves. We've got so much information to give you. But anyway, right, so I'm going to go through with the overclocking, because I need to explain to you about my overclocking before I can start showing you graphs. Because once I show you graphs, you're going to see the overclock there, so you're going to need to know what I've done. So what I did with the overclocking was went full manual, so literally forcing all the cores to run all at the same speed. And when I did that, we also did overclock testing at that. So what I'll do is, I'm going to talk to you about temps. Now I've got my graphs and stuff, do you know what I mean? So I can talk to you. So air at stock with the 2950X was 66 with the Cooler Master cooler, which I should have in the shot. Like I said, I should have in the shot. I've just had to literally rip it out of the rig because we were using it for something else, which you're going to be seeing in the not too distant future. So it's 66 degrees on air, bang up to 32 core, and weirdly it ran a bit cooler. So it was around 55 degrees. Now I always test in a 20 degrees room, and it basically what you need to remember is depending on the temperatures, depends on the actual performance that you get. So we kind of get the feeling that it was kind of not necessarily not running at full capacity, but it was we did notice that it was running a couple of hundred megahertz lower than it would have been with the AIO. So with the 32 core, the difference definitely will make a difference in your performance. It may even be something that will go back and run a whole load of other tests on so that you can see the difference with the air. But obviously then we're going to be writing a review to show you how much lower it will run on air. And I don't really think that's fair, and it's probably not worth 2 or 3 days of my life either. But that was one of the reasons why we think that the air was slightly cooler, and it was not because of, you'd normally just think it was a better cooler, but we actually think it was the CPU not running as hot. Run up to the AIO. AIO on the 2950X, you were looking at 60 degrees. AIO on the 32 core, again, got a bit weird, 50 degrees. Don't know why that was, because it was running faster than that was. It was just one of those weird days. Now, overclock. And this is where it all starts to get a little bit confusing and a bit more interesting. And that is the 16 core. We managed to get running at 4.05 gigahertz maximum, and it needed 1.4 volts for that as well. But that was fixed across all of the cores. I could get a screenshot of 4.375, but to be honest with you, I couldn't even get 4.1 gigahertz fully stable to go through all of our tests. And that was whether that was, with the AIO, and then what I'll also call batshit crazy fans, because I literally had fans blowing in from the top of the case. I had fans blowing in on the top of the CPU. I had fans blowing at the back of the socket, just to try and keep the temperatures down. And because once you push past that point, I couldn't keep everything cool enough. So the overclock at 4.05, 1.41 volts, 1.4 volts, we were getting about 80 degrees. Once we pushed past that point, literally the temps went up rapid. I do think with a decent water block, which covered the VRMs as well, I do think I could have got a little bit more, but it would have been literally at the screaming edge of things. I think with the 2950X, you're probably going to be looking around the 4 gigahertz mark for most people with a decent board, with decent case airflow. Definitely going to need roof fans, especially with the Zenith. I reckon about 4 gigahertz. Then when you move up to the 32 core, you did need kind of crazy fans 100% at this point. 84 degrees on the CPU. At this point, with the VRMs, we did need a fan around the back of the board to help cool the back of the socket, and the bits that are back there, because there is a heat sink around the back, up the top there, see? So we did have a fan around the back of the board, and we definitely 100% needed a fan on the top of the board to keep everything in check. That was with fans in the roof as well, and that was just because, as you'll see with the power in a minute, when you do bang that overclock on and you fix those volts and you fix the cores, the power it uses is insane, because at standard it's allowed to move around, and you'll never get like 4 gigahertz all the time. As I've already said, it runs at like I think I wrote it down, it runs around 3.637, so we were forcing ours to run at 4.05 at 1.36 volts. It was it was a monster. So the amount of power and all of that stuff that it can chomp through 1.4 volts, sorry. So you do need to keep that in mind. The Zenith, if you're going to run a manual overclock 24/7, 100%, I would say you need a full, I think EK make them, a full cover water block which does the VRMs as well. They do a little fan that goes on the top of the heatsink. I just found it annoying. There is another little one over here. It was just it just blew over the top. And to be honest with you, with the way that the fan went on there, I'm not even going to show you, but you can see with the heatsink, it just kind of blew at the heatsink. There was nowhere for it to blow through or anything like that. But that is only with a full-blown manual overclock, like 4.4 gigahertz with 1.4 volts. It's a lot for it to kind of choke with. If you did have a decent case with decent airflow and stuff, there would be ways that you could get it running and it wouldn't be too much of an issue. And what you need to remember is when I say stable, I'm literally handing these poor little things their rear ends. Absolutely working them to the absolute hilt. Now that could be the same as if you guys are going to be using like 3D Max or like Blender and that sort of stuff, that is the type of load that I'm on about, and it will put an absolute spanking onto it. So without the you know, like a decent system set of airflow, and it has to be decent system set of airflow because of the, as you'll see in a minute, it's like 780 watts going in there. So that's why it was creating so much heat, because the VRMs were working their absolute nuts off. So as far as like, I don't think you'd ever have a CPU like this and expect to use it passive or on a test bench with no airflow whatsoever. What I am saying is top end airflow is absolutely critical to being able to keep this happy. So the other thing is, quite a lot of people might be working like air conditioned rooms and all of that sort of stuff. It will help. It's definitely going to help, and it's just the way it is. But anyway, so 84 degrees, VRM temperatures, warm, very, very warm. So you're going to be looking at 100 degrees easy on the VRMs with a manual overclock. It's very different when you leave it alone though, and you just let it do its boost itself, because then you're looking at kind of the high 70s to the early 80s. So it's only the manual side of things that makes the boards and everything just basically crap their pants. And when we get to the power graph in a minute, you'll be able to see the difference between them running, you know, normal left alone, being able to boost the clocks where they want them and forcing them all to run significantly higher, because it's like a 400 megahertz overclock that we were given, 400 megahertz overclock. And it was literally just that difference between the two was insane. So next thing that we need to talk about, we're going to get to the performance side of things, but I really want to talk to you about Temps, and that was because, to be honest with you, like I've said, I didn't think that they were that bad, in all honesty. The fact that you can cool a stock one with an air cooler is pretty epic. The air cooler itself isn't very loud at all, to the point where when I put it on 12 volts, which is what I was doing for the CPU test, it's actually really quiet. I think you could probably change the fan in it and make it even cool even better. There is a lot of weight to it. I know there's always the scaremongers about the weight of a CPU heatsink, bending and breaking boards and stuff. Well, if you're going to be moving your case around a lot, or you can't put it down gently, then yeah, banging it around may, over time, break something. But to be honest with you, I've used air coolers for years and I've never really had any massive issues. It's a very sexy air cooler. I think the fact that they've actually gone out of their way and got a dedicated partner like Cooler Master to make one, it's in keeping with the current RGB theme. You can obviously set it to what you want, or you can turn it off as well, because there's the SATA power for the lights. You don't have to have it on if you don't want to. The SATA power for the lights, it will just cycle on its own, or you need to connect, there's another little wire in here to be able to, and it goes off to a RGB connector if you want to manually set it in with all your board's themes and stuff. So the fact that you can actually do that, I think, is absolutely epic. This with the 2950X makes a lot of sense. It is pretty good with the 2990WX, and to be honest with you, I think with the 2990WX you could probably even get away with doing some voltage like undervolting with an offset. I think you could probably get around that nice and easy. Manual overclocking though, no, you would need to go with the full blown. Now Cooler Master do this 360, and they also do a 280. Fans, again, the only reason why I changed them is because they don't spin that fast. But if you're going to go absolutely full nuts, like I did, big volts, forcing all the cores to like 4 gigahertz or beyond, depending on the silicon lottery, you might get a bit luckier. You can also overclock your CPU depending on the fastest cores that you can see in Ryzen Master as well, so you could have them all running slightly differently anyway. But that's when you're going to need to invest in something like this, or maybe something like from EK with a dedicated full fat TR4 water cooling block, or maybe even a full cover block to do the VRMs with the Zenith as well. So there's lots and lots of information there for you to chew on, and if you can hear me breathing, It's just because I'm asthmatic. So the first graph I'm going to show you, and I've purposely gone with the one that doesn't look that great, because from after this point, the only bad one is going to be the power graph. Okay, so Cinebench, smash it in, have a look, just chew the fat with it really. I like the fact with this that, in all honesty, you can see the 2950X is smashing out some pretty good single threaded scores against the 7900X. Now the ones near the top of the graph, do you know what I mean? They're pretty self-explanatory. They're all overclocked. It's single threaded, so the faster that they run, the better. The overclock scores for the 2950X and the 2990WX actually going down at the bottom didn't really make a great deal of sense, in all honesty. All of the high threaded stuff responded amazingly well to the overclocks. So the fact that the single threaded ones went down didn't really make a great deal of sense. But then when you think about it, it does. Because what we effectively did was force one core, or we forced all of them, sorry, to run at 4 gigahertz. Whereas by running just a single thread like this, the CPU would have worked out that it's only single threaded, let you use the, the fastest core available, and would technically been running a little bit quicker. So there's a really confusing conundrum for you. Well, not confusing, it makes a lot of sense, but it's also kind of, it leaves you with a bit of a tiz-was. So in single threaded apps, you're better off leaving it as stock, only marginally. But then with the manual overclock, that's when we flick over to the multi-threaded Cinebench graph. And this is the point where it just makes me want to put my thing down and go, because what the 2990WX has done is pretty much blown, everyone's heard of HWBot. If you haven't, go and have a look. It's basically where all of the CPU benchmarks go, and everything's left in graphs, and it's a giant competition basically on what's the fastest. Well, the 2990WX has just literally blown that website to bits, because stock CPUs now are just smashing some of the scores that are on that website to absolute kingdom come. Most of the ones up there that come close are going to be multi-socket CPUs, so like server CPUs and stuff like that. Some of them up there with even more cores can't compete with a single one of these, because let's face it, 32 cores on a single platform is a big new thing. But the big new thing is right at the top, because with a manual overclock, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, 6,200 plus points in Cinebench 15. It's like, what are you on about? That was also, by the way, with 3200 megahertz memory, because I've run 3200 megahertz memory throughout with this, because we didn't really get enough time to be able to like start looking to go higher. It really didn't. It was like about a week that we ended up doing with testing. One thing that I will say though, and this is more important on the 2990WX than it is on the 2950X, is memory bandwidth matters. Literally, if you turn the memory bandwidth down or leave it at stocks, it's like 2400, 2666, that Cinebench score would be way below 6,000 points. So just by flicking that memory up, and basically you're making the pipe, if you imagine the memory being a pipe, and that bandwidth, if you go from, let's say 2400 up to 3200, it makes that pipe bigger. Making that pipe bigger actually smashes your scores up like no end. So it's one of the ones where if you're gonna get something like this, you're gonna wanna get 3200 megahertz. I would say you owe it to yourself. Some people are gonna say, can I run quicker? We did some initial tests, and it really does get to a point where you're going to be running a balancing act because of having to turn up the SoC volts and stuff like that. 3200 is the nice kind of like level playing field at the moment. Also with the way that AMD do their memory binning, because they do it, they have to do all the memory refinements, and then it gets rolled out into your Gisa code, which gets added to the BIOS. So that's where your memory profiling comes on. It can take a little bit longer. So with the higher speeds, you're always going to be risking, if you bought a faster than 3200 megahertz kit, you may run into issues where the board just doesn't post. It's not going to be Asus's fault at that point either. It's literally going to be down to where the memory comms are done. So that's why I'd always say, get yourself a decent 3200 megahertz kit, and then if you can overclock that memory kit past that point and your CPU can kind of balance it out and kind of handle it, that's the way to go with it. Not just buying a 3600 megahertz kit and then moaning online, sending me PMs going, oh, I can't get 3400 to run, I'm going back to the other team. It's just like, okay. So that is my advice for memory. But Cinebench, literally, it took the ball, and I was going to say kick it out of the park, but it's been so hard out the park, it's unbelievable. Then we move on to Blender. Now this is my own custom version of Blender. It's an OC3D render. It's just got like, I think it's like 4 million polygons in it. We do a 1080 version, we do a 4K version. It absolutely hands the CPU its rear end as well. It's this benchmark that normally cooks VRMs. There's a company out that doesn't like me talking about VRMs. They don't like me talking about VRMs because my Blender test makes theirs overheat. But oh my God. So the old 2700 with an overclock, so the 2700X, that with an overclock was doing 30-minute Blender runs. This, 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It was like, what? What are you even on about? It's just, it was ridiculous. I'm going to put this into context as well, because I've had a few people saying to me, oh, the 7980XE isn't, you know, it's always going to be better than the AMD stuff. Well, that took 10.5 minutes to do the same Blender run. This did it 2 minutes quicker. And I don't even think that my Blender is that complicated. So if you were doing literally like crazy stuff, this would chomp through it, literally just like Pac-Man going through a field of, I want to say mushrooms, but now I'm thinking of Mario at the same time. But you get what I'm on about. It's literally, it'll just go through it like an absolute behemoth. And it's kind of in this graph that you need to remember as well, that the 7980XE is only 18 cores and 2 minutes quicker, but they're roughly the same sort of price. I can genuinely see that 7980XE coming down in price now, if I'm honest, because AMD have properly gone in aggressive with how much this can do with heavy threaded workloads. It's insane. CPU temperatures. I'm going to bring this in now because the CPU temperatures, oh, we've already done CPU temperatures, what I'm on about. It was the not the VRMs, it was the power that I wanted. It's at the back somewhere. Or did I leave it down there? I left it down there. So we're going to go with power. And the power side of things, it can use a lot of wattage. You can see with the graph, it's up there, 780 watts. But that's when you force it. Look at the difference when you leave it running to its own devices. You're just going to have to decide how big you want to go with it. I think a lot of you are probably going to leave it marginally on its own, because with the overclocking on this, one thing I will say is it's pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, all or nothing. You either go absolute hell for leather, get it up to 4, maybe even beyond if you're lucky, and then run with it. But I don't think there's any point going 3.8 manual or 3.9 manual. It's pretty much go for it or don't go for it. Now the reason why I'm saying that at the same time as a power graph is that's also going to make a big difference to your choices as far as your CPU is concerned. Most of the boards are going to have 2 8-pin CPUs. You're going to need to make sure you've got that for your CPU, for your power supply. I genuinely say that I would not want to run a fully overclocked, manually overclocked system like this with any less than a proper quality 1200 watt power supply. I tested mine with an AX1500i, and even that was getting warm, because at the end of the day we were running for literally hours and hours on end, smashing these CPUs to bits. So, you know, 1200 watts, that's properly putting that 1500 watt power supply to work. That's like 70% for hours on end. And my overclock testing took over a day. alone to do. It was like, had to have the aircon on, literally even my air conditioner was just like going nuts. And that's another thing that you kind of need to keep in mind as well, is if you are going to get one of these and you're seriously considering getting one of these, is summer months. They're still going to create a lot of heat. I would say that if you're going to be working with one of these, gaming with one of these, especially with some of the warm weather that we've had in the UK recently, you're going to need to keep your room cooler if you're going manual overclock. So it's getting kind of expensive at this point. So you are going to need to keep that in mind. I do think with a reasonable kind of like water cooling kit, you might be able to get away with it. Maybe worst case scenario, if you're like up in a loft or something, you might have to turn your overclock off for summer. But, you know, because let's face it, air conditioners aren't cheap. You can get the portable ones, which will be pretty good, but then they're noisy as you like. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you do need to kind of keep in mind at this point to keep things all in check. If you're one of those lucky people that live in a sunny country and air conditioning is just built into your house anyway, you're not going to have any issues. But if you're in Blighty, that sort of thing, reasonably warm day, like I said, maybe you're in a new build house up in the loft, it's going to get warm. You're going to have to, you know, start thinking about what you're going to do for cooling to keep everything in check. So there's lots of those little bits and bobs for you to keep in mind. Now, gaming. I'm not surprised, but it's not as good. Just going to put that up there. But at the end of the day, neither of them are really gaming CPUs. The bulk of games will require more clock speed than cores. So anything that's running with a higher clock speed will run better. The only thing that I will say is Warhammer on these, I would not even bother. The game needs patching. It literally just has a heart attack. It doesn't know what to do with all the cores. It runs really badly. So and even in the AMD graphs that they showed us at the event, you could literally, I think it was 80% down compared to the Intel competition. And like I said, it's just because of that game specifically needs patching. One thing I will say though is they were saying that in the grand scheme of things, it's somewhere between 5 and 8% less than they would have been on one of the competition CPUs compared to the AMD one, which when you think about it, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, with a processor like this, which is pretty much just built for all of those threads, if you wanted a machine that you could do absolutely obliterate your day-to-day work on and then still flick onto a game, then it's not going to do too badly. But then again, you would, in all honesty, have the argument for the Intel side of things as well, in that it's going to work pretty well, but it's still going to smash the games out like Billy-O. But one thing I will say is the difference between the games has been reduced significantly. Clock speed and single-threaded performance, it still is something that is holding AMD back a little bit, but we need to remember it's still basically Ryzen. We've just got lots more Ryzen in there. I talked to you about memory performance. Memory performance, we're now up to quad channel, so the memory performance jumped up. The bandwidth was getting put through and everything was done pretty well. These are all fairly similar results, and that's because we run them all at 3200 megahertz. You can see further down though that with, like for example, the 2700X, we managed to do that at 3400 megahertz, and you can still see that the results are less. So the memory bandwidth does, you can see in synthetic benchmarks, did make a nice big jump. Now I'm going to put all my graphs down and I'm going to get here, and I'm going to admit something, because I do a lot of work with Intel. You kind of have to. Intel are massive. They make good stuff. They make all sorts of kit now, do you know what I mean? From solid state drives to the cache-in drives, do you know what I mean? So I do a lot of work with Intel. But what people seem to forget is I do a lot of work with everyone, because you kind of have to. But I wanted to draw attention to the fact that I do a lot of work with Intel, because this absolutely smashes anything that they've got out at the moment to bits. Multi-threaded stuff, it's basically taken the rulebook for multi-threaded stuff, ripped it up and thrown it away, had a wee on it, and then laughed at it afterwards before covering it in napalm and setting light to it, because it's yes, all they have done is added loads more cores, but they've done it in quite a spectacular way because the difference in the graphs is immense. Now, I will go as far as to say 32 cores, 1,800 quid, awful lot of money. It is making the boards absolutely crap their pants as well, because they're pulling a lot more power as well, an awful lot more power. Now, I was getting around the kind of 650 mark watt load with the old 16 core anyway. So then you put 780 watts worth of load onto this, and you do get to the point where you kind of do need to have serious thoughts about your cooling, ambient temperatures, and it does get to the point where it gets complicated if you're going to be running a manual overclock. But they do run flipping well without them. I think we went from 5,000 points up to like 6,200. But 5,000 points still smashes everything that we'd ever seen before. I mean, you saw the graph before. I'm just trying to bring it up real quick. But you saw the graph before, and at the top, you have the 2990WX. Both stock and overclocked are right up there at the top. Look at the difference between that and the 7980XE with an overclock on it. Right, go a little bit further down and find out where the normal one is. So the 7980XE was 3,400 points. We went to 5,000 points for a stock run. And that's all down to the multi-threaded side of things. Now, as I've said, not going to be a gaming CPU on this. I do see there being a lot of grey area with the 2950X and that 16. Essentially what they've done with the 2950X is they've taken the 7950, 7950X, you got me with the numbers all the way, wrong way around now, but the 1950X, and they've given it all that Ryzen Plus love with the new precision boost. So they've kind of taken that, given it a little bit of refinement, and you're going to get yourself a tasty boost there. You're also going to get a CPU that you can you can get away with running it at stock with an air cooler as well, and it's a decent air cooler. Get it on some water cooling, you'll get a little bit more performance again. But if you're looking for something to take, like Blender, like the Cinebench sort of stuff with lots and lots of like 3D going on, loads of polygons, all of that sort of stuff, or running loads of stuff at the same time, then the 32 core is it's an absolute monster. And in all honesty, it's that much of a monster. It has made me wonder, considering the old 1950X was pretty much the way this one was anyway. They did say that the other four things were just blank, and I've never ever believed that. I think that they've always been constantly trying to get to the point where they can turn all four of the CCXs on, and oh my god, now they've done it, they've got it working, and in the right workloads, it's unbelievable. My jaw dropped when I got over 6,000 points on Cinebench. In all honesty, when I was at the AMD thing and I first saw 5,000 points, I was like, WTF? But 6,000 at home, no specialist equipment, no dry ice, no liquid nitrogen, no helium. Yeah, all right, I had an air conditioner on and I had some fans going on it, but that was it. And I managed to get 6,000 points. There are people on HWBot that have struggled to do that with liquid nitrogen. It's insane. So, the big and bad, and it literally, the 32 core is performance award territory, because the performance that you can get out of it, if you're willing to put the kind of effort in and make the conscious choices, if you're going to manually overclock and you're aware of all the other bits and bobs that you need to do, and you also need to give them props for the fact that they did that and they kept it on the same TR4 socket as well. It's a no-brainer. The 2950X, that's the enthusiast award, because yes, it is only another 16 core, but they have refined it. I'm hoping that we're going to see more boards now coming out, because I definitely like to see a Zenith Extreme 2. You've got the new the Meg Creation And there's also the Extreme from Gigabyte as well. So I'm genuinely hoping that we might see a couple of other ones. Don't know what ASRock are going to bring through, but I'm hoping this is going to be the one that's going to really kind of kickstart things, because this is crazy good compared to what, you know, and they've also brought that price down a little bit as well. They've not brought the new one out and put the price up more. They've actually brought it down a little bit, which again, it's making it properly aggressive. And the other thing that I've not really drawn enough attention to is, if you think about this, is cheaper than the 7900X and smashes that to bits as well. That's the other thing. They are really going for the jugular. So there's lots of points for you to kind of get there, chew through. Please comment underneath if you'd like a proper discussion about this video, the results. You can go to the OC3D forums and you can chat with me there. Don't forget, if you like this video, I know it's long, but that's just the way I do things, because there's a lot of information I think that we need to get across. You can hit the subscribe button. There's me on Twitter, there's OC3D on Twitter. I've got an Instagram page as well. So there's, and Facebook. I'm on all of the things. So if you want to follow, you can follow. I'm not a leader, but you can follow. Anyway, this has been the tiniest of Logans with the absolutely monstrous, I think I may have to build myself a new rig, 2990 WX. Can you hear that? Yeah, I've cut it in. I'm just going to say, can you hear that? There's someone crying about the fact that AMD are topping loads of the graphs.